to welcome you to the Palm Desert City Council study session scheduled for October 28th, 2021. And Todd, do you have anything to say, or shall we turn it over to our city attorney?
I think we should turn it over to our city attorney. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. I'm going to ask the city clerk if she can put up our little short slide presentation. So we got some audio visuals for you today. All right. If we can get the next slide, please. So this is what we're going to talk about briefly, and I'm going to talk for a few minutes and then turn it over to you all. Talk about the mayor's request, what the settlement agreement provides, and what the council choices are. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you remember a couple meetings ago, the mayor requested, and the request was supported by council members, Mayor Pro Tem Harnik and Council Member Quintanilla. The request was to discuss possible council adoption of a resolution calling for a ballot measure for 5 districts. And in order to hit the November 2020 election, we would need to adopt a resolution to that effect by June. And the resolution would have, it'd be about calling the election. It would also have a draft 5-district ordinance attached to it. So that's in a nutshell the process. And we can go more into the process now or some other time, but I don't know that we need to address it now. We've got lots of time to get into the details. Next slide, please. Okay, so the settlement agreement of the voting rights litigation had several relevant provisions to this. And one is, it set up the 2-district situation that we have now with 1 council member and 4 council members. It also provides for ranked choice voting. That particular requirement got suspended in the last cycle because there was too much going on. Plaintiffs allowed us to kick that back to 2022, but as it stands now, we would be required to do ranked choice voting in 2022. And the settlement agreement also specifically provides that we can go to 5 districts. So that's an option that the council has or the voters have. So next slide, please. So these are your choices. We can retain the status quo. We can put the 5-district measure on the ballot, on the 2022 ballot. And we can proceed. The third option there is to proceed with option 2 on the condition that ranked choice voting is dropped. But that would only work if plaintiffs agree. So we'd have to get into an agreement on that. In any case, regardless of what we do on the ballot measure, we do have to go through the redistricting process to true up our districts to the 2022 census or the 2020 census numbers. And as it turns out, the census numbers came in such that the Civic Center district is just a tad bit under what it needs to be. So we're going to have to do some minor adjustments in that district to add, between, I think it was a few hundred up to maybe 1,700 new people into that district. So we're going to have to go through that same districting process we went through, a year and a half ago, a series of meetings and public participation and draft maps and so forth. So that's about all I have. Madam Mayor, any questions?
Let's stop screen share so it's easy to see who might have questions. Thank you for that overview, Bob. I think that was helpful. Do council members have questions? Councilmember Jonathan.
Thank you, Mayor. So Yeah, I'm just trying to get my arms wrapped around this. And you gave us at least 3 options to consider, Bob. I want to make sure I understand the process. And, you know, this is a study session. It's a public meeting, but we're discussing a settlement agreement, which is usually a closed door, closed session item. And of course, overlaid with that is that we have the plaintiff as part of this discussion, the plaintiff who is a party to the settlement agreement. So I guess I want to be careful, as I know we all want to observe all legal restrictions. So my question is one of process. The third option that you put on the screen was intriguing. It was interesting because it brought up ranked choice voting. And personally, I have a sense that maybe that's something that nobody really wants. So if we wanted to explore that possibility, what's the process for that? Would we continue the study session just to get further information if that option is actually on the table? How do we move forward and observe all legal protocols?
Yes, I think if there's a consensus that that's an option that wants to be pursued, and we can't make a decision one way or the other, but we could go back to plaintiff's attorney and put that on the table and find out if they'd be amenable to that. And if they're not, then well, if they are or they aren't, we'll go forward with that knowledge, come back to you with an action item at some point.
Well, to avoid that in and of itself being an action item, would that simply take the form of a direction to staff? And if there's no objection, kind of then there's a consensus? I mean, I just want to be very careful here.
Well, let me suggest that unless some council member objects to having that exploratory conversation, it seems entirely reasonable to have that exploratory conversation. So we do know if that's a viable option at the point when this shows up as a discussion item. I don't see any objections. So, Councilmember Nestante.
Thank you, Mayor. This is not an objection. And just a little bit of history is that back when we were having this discussion about going to 2 districts, 5 districts, fighting the lawsuit and all that, I was and am very open-minded to all possibilities to make sure everybody's represented here in the city of Palm Desert. I just want to point out, though, is that I've had other constituents with very important issues dear and near to them that had called out to get it on the ballot, not just let us 5 vote on an issue. So I just want to make us all aware of that there will probably be other topics, hot button topics, where the people would like it on the ballot. So I just want to, point that out. And as we move forward, exploring getting this on the ballot.
Thank you for that. Of course, when this returns as a discussion item on the action agenda, we'll have a full opportunity to talk about whether the process of our election is distinct from other operating issues of the city. But we'll save that for a later day. So,
thank you, Mayor.
So Bob, I'm not seeing any objection. I'm not hearing any objection to pursuing that exploration. So let's do that. So we do know whether that's a viable option at the point in time when this is on the action agenda. Councilmember Quintanilla.
My question is in regards to the process and timeline. Should the decision be made to advance towards something in November? How long would it take to draft the wording for the ordinance? Is that something that is already being explored? And what is the further timeline again, should we move in that direction?
The ordinances are pretty straightforward, and it wouldn't take long to draft it as soon as we got that. I mean, we could come up with a draft relatively quickly. And it's, and we'll wait for council direction. I guess we'd kind of prefer not to conflate the ballot measure issue with the map redistricting issue, but I think inevitably there's going to be some at least cross-referencing. So, but we'll work and try to keep those on separate tracks so they don't get entangled in people's minds, which I think might become an issue.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, and if I could make a further comment, I anticipate the measure, the ballot measure would say something to the effect, do you want to go to 5 districts, right? Yes or no. And if the people vote yes in 2022, then that would lead into another redistricting process afterwards to actually come up with those maps, because that will be a convoluted process, I'm sure. But we don't have to decide what those maps would look like before we put the measure on the ballot. We'd want to know if that's where people want to go. And if they do, then we'll take the next step, come up with the maps, go through the same approval process that we've been through before, and then be ready in the 2024 election to go into 5 districts.
Councilmember Jonathan.
Thank you, Mayor. On that point, Bob, and I don't know if there is a ballot measure, I don't know what it would look like. Obviously, we have had no staff report or discussion on that specific issue. But if there is something similar to what you're suggesting, if that in fact happens, isn't there some kind of an opportunity for the council to opine on that ballot measure and to take a formal position as a council? Didn't I hear something about that?
Yeah, the ballot measure process, if it's a city council initiated ballot measure, the city council has the opportunity to designate people to make arguments in favor or against or both. I mean, different people on the council could be designated to come up with arguments for and against, and the council as a whole could take a position. And then, when the ballot measure materials go out, you have those arguments. You always have the arguments for, you have the arguments against, and then you have the rebuttal. So the council members would basically have first crack at crafting those arguments.
Thank you.
Councilmember Quintanilla.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is twofold. First question is, what is the approximate cost that we anticipate for the process and election and all of that? And the second part of that question is, is the council able to vote from within to move to 5 districts and spare the city the expense?
Well, the first question, I don't know what the expense would be, but given that it would go on the 2022 election where the process is already in place, it shouldn't be a large amount, but I'll defer to the city clerk on that one. And yeah, the city council has the option of going to 5 districts. I mean, just by the city council can make that decision. It doesn't have to go to the voters.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Other questions? I think this has been a very good first opportunity to get the lay of the land. So would it be correct to expect that as soon as we have the answer to that exploratory conversation with plaintiffs about willingness to dispense with ranked choice voting, that this issue would then be ripe for placement on the discussion agenda?
Yeah, that would be my understanding. We will contact plaintiff's attorney and have that discussion. And with any luck, we could be back at our next meeting.
All right. I do see that we have some members of the public attending this study session. We don't typically receive public comment at study sessions, but when the topic returns to the action agenda, that will be appropriate. Councilmember Jonathan.
Thank you. And again, just on that last point, from a standpoint of process, once we have further information, as we've asked the city attorney to provide, the question doesn't automatically go to our agenda on open session, right? Don't we still have to, at that point, if we adopt the procedures that are being considered at this afternoon's meeting, don't we still have to have a formal request at that point by 2 or more council members? Isn't that what the direction we're taking?
We have that. The request has been made. It's supported by a total of 3 council members. The procedural item on today's agenda is basically memorializing our existing practice.
Okay, so this study session is just preparatory to whenever it does go on the open meeting agenda.
That's been my understanding.
Okay.
Councilmember Nastante.
Okay, and when it goes on our agenda, we don't know what that's going to look like, correct? Because we might have the option that council might vote to approve 5 districts without going on as a ballot measure, correct? Or we could, how's that going to work?
Well, let me suggest this. We don't have 2 council members right now who have requested to discuss the council itself moving to 5 districts.
Or not.
But what we have is 3 council members who have requested to discuss making it a ballot measure. So there is a distinction there. The topic of the council initiating a change has not been the subject of a request for action. So for that to be within bounds for discussion, we'd have to have 2 council members follow the procedure that's proposed tonight. All right. Looks like we've heard plenty to spur up our thoughts. Next today is our closed session at 3 o'clock. We do have 1 member of the public who has requested to make comment on the closed session agenda. So just like the good old days when we were in person, we're going to start by using this link, this open session link, to hear that comment before we move to the closed session link. So you can either leave and come back, or you can go off audio and off video and come back. But we'll start with the same link at 3 o'clock. Got it?
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.